Hey there, my name is Gardner I. You might know me as Garden Sound. I'm the creative director behind Garden Sound 365, which is a music project where I upload a new song every day to YouTube for an entire year. The music you're hearing right now was made by Bill Day, an electronic musician who goes by the name Mr. Bill. Mr. Bill has been touring the United States and the world recently, and has been wowing audiences with his crazy show involving synthesizers, live drums, and an inflatable version of his mascot. I recently had the opportunity and privilege to sit down and interview him before his show in Atlanta, Georgia.
Are you nervous about the show? Being on camera?
We actually ended up not being able to use that audio because the bar noise sounded like shit. So anyway, yeah, I got your notes about the interview, and yeah, it's the audio's pretty harsh. Ironically, the audio from my microphone was a bit too harsh on that interview, so we redid it a second time. Well, Bill, it's a pleasure having you back. Thanks for doing this a third time.
Yeah, of course, man. I'm sorry about the first two times. We just had some bad luck, I guess, with audio recordings and video recordings and stuff. But, you know, it's better, I think, to do it right and then make something that people are going to enjoy watching rather than something that they're going to watch and sort of cringe at a little bit and be like, oh, that fucking, you know, we're pandering to audio people right now. So,
Oh yeah, they can be sometimes just the harshest critics, man. But that's cool. We love them.
definitely.
So yeah, I'm just gonna jump right into it. Let's talk about composition and your composition style. And we talked about this a while back, and we'd come to the conclusion that you kind of tiptoe the line between intentional composition and unintentional composition or seed-generated composition, right? So the more random kind of composition where you feedback from the computer into yourself and kind of jam with the computer as its own instrument, right? The whole idea of the computer is part of the process, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think any creative process is always an input-output system, though. So it's kind of like when say you like put Beethoven or Bach or somebody in front of like a piano or a harpsichord, they would like press the key of the piano, and then something in their brain goes like, "Oh, I like that," you know, and then that's the input back into them, and then they're outputting back again to the piano, and then the piano is giving something back to them. That's you know, so it's sort of like a generative process even on that level, but with a computer, I think that's just exacerbated like a million times because you just have so many options and so much to do. So it's kind of like you could just click things and create generative patches, and like with synths, you can have like, you know, unlimited options going on with your synths and all these things like interacting and just crazy amounts of data being spat out at you, just giving you so many ideas, and then, you know, those ideas that you put back into the computer regenerate more ideas and so on and so forth. So I think it's sort of like ignorant for anybody to say that that their compositions are totally what is the word, intentional. I think that it's always going to be like there's always going to be some unintentional thing in the process that causes you to do certain things, whether or not you're aware of it or whatever. I mean, that's starting to sound elitist, but yeah, I think every creative process has definitely got that input output vibe to it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in a sense, I would argue that all composition is through composed, right? In the formal school of composition, you've got your works that are, you know, thought of beforehand, right? Your you know, where composers like Beethoven would argue that they conceived of the whole thing in their mind before they wrote it down, and I would argue that no, it's not actually possible. You know, by the time you sit down, because Beethoven did write with the piano before he went deaf, you know, by the time you sit down and start hammering out some ideas, you're going to inspire yourself. Or you might hear something that, you know, I do this myself all the time where I'll sit down and start writing, and I'll have an idea when I sit down, but by the time I start to jam a little bit with the keyboard, I'm like, oh, fuck my idea. This sounds way better.
Right, totally. And that's just like an example of the computer sort of, you know, giving its 2 cents a little bit, if you want to treat it as that sentient type of idea. But I don't necessarily think of it quite like that, but I think of it somewhere, I guess, in between maybe. But yeah, it's kind of interesting because I don't ever think, I mean, I don't know. Do you believe in hard determinism? Do you know what that is?
I think I do, but why don't you just explain it to me anyway?
The hard determinism is like the idea that you were never like you were basically the only thing that was generated at the start of your existence was like a set of conditions, and then because of that set of conditions, a certain thing happened, and then a certain other thing happened, and a certain other thing happened, et cetera, and that was never going to be any different. Like if you always started with those conditions, that was always going to be the outcome, right? So hard determinism basically is just saying that you're not in control at all. Like no matter what, you're always going to be into this, and you're always going to be doing certain things. And I'm not sure if I believe in that totally, but I think my belief lies somewhere in the middle of determinism uh and like I guess the belief of hard compositions that you do make everything from scratch, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess another thing I might call that would be the predestination or predetermination, right?
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
the whole notion that certain things were set into motion and that's the way they're going to be, right? And that's the way they were always going to be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's pretty much what that whole notion is. Yeah, there's a lot of if you go to Crash Course on Philosophy, there's a really good video on hard determinism that's kind of interesting that you should watch.
All right, we'll do. I don't know. I don't know if I believe in it or not. I think I'm more of a along the lines of there's so many random there's so many bits of entropy in life that you know what I'm saying. Anything from like looking at cancer cells as just entropy. They didn't really form the correct way, that kind of thing. And I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess, but it depends. Like determinism is such a philosophical thing, and I don't know if they believe that stuff down to a cellular level, but I believe that hard determinists probably do. Um, but yeah, I'm not really sure. Actually, it's kind of a complicated thing to think about, and obviously, it's many things in philosophy aren't really provable. Like, I mean, I don't know. Philosophy seems kind of weird, but yeah.
we got off topic really quick this time.
Yeah, yeah. I think the first time it took us a while to get to philosophy.
Yeah, we were like 26 minutes into it. So now that we're on the topic of philosophy, let's just flow right into intention, right?
Okay.
So, we talked a little bit about intention and about how, depending on what you're writing, your intention changes, right? And then I want you to talk a little bit about how your intention is different when you sit down to write stuff. Like you might be practicing comp, or maybe you're writing for the show, or maybe you're doing some film. I know you've been doing film work lately. Why don't you talk about that for me?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think a lot of the times when I'm sitting down to write my own music, the intention is more or less to have no intention. Like my intention is more or less to just do whatever I feel and make the sort of craziest things I can. And try not to try to like jam with my computer in that sense of like an input output system. Like I'll do things to the computer and then like let's say I was playing drums and then I look at the bass player and like do a certain thing and then the bass player is like, oh yeah, and like he kind of gets on that vibe too. So it's sort of like we're jamming. And I feel like the same way with a computer. It's sort of like I'll do some certain things and I'll like I'll put in some certain data to the computer and then the computer will be like, oh yeah, and like spit out some generative stuff. And it's all like an exact thing, but the thing is that my brain will never sort of comprehend how many possibilities that there are in a computer. Like our brains aren't set up to know about all of that stuff, whereas a computer is. So I kind of like jamming with my computer in that way when I'm writing music for myself. But when I'm writing music for film or something like that, then it's more about like narrating or notating like a vibe or a scene or like an emotion. So in that sense, it's much more intentional because the possibilities are way more limited. Whereas when I'm writing music for myself, I don't like to have any limitations, or if I do have any limitations, they're very like subconscious and very much like just ingrained in my influences and what I like, and like the shape of my ears and the kind of like frequencies that I might preference and the kind of like styles that I might preference and stuff. That's the only sort of limitations that I have is sort of my own preferences, which again, probably you can get back into determinism. Like my preferences were maybe always going to be that way, just like everybody's preferences would always, the confusing thing to think about. But now my brain's just like on that vibe. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's important to try both. Like try to be super intentional with composition, but I also think being super unintentional and random with composition is also not something that should be ignored. I think like a lot of beauty hides in randomness.
Oh, absolutely. I think I do both. I have a good balance of both because I do my daily stuff, right? The 365 stuff, that's random usually. I
Right.
don't ever sit down with the intention of writing anything specific unless I state it in my video. Like, cause sometimes I'll sit down and I'm like, you know what? I feel like writing Prague House today, and I just do. Or maybe, you know what I'm saying? Like maybe the genre will be the seed for whatever comes next. But I mean, but when I'm writing an album, I'm super intentional about that. I'm like, I want this to sound like this, and I want these 3 tracks to kind of go with that track. You know what I'm saying?
And do you finish the tracks for the album in one day, or do you spend months on them?
No, I finish them quickly because if I don't, I'll lose that.
Yeah, you lose that intention, right? So yeah, that's another weird thing is that if you spend like a month writing a track, then you're essentially writing the track with 3 or 4 different people. Kind of like,
It's
you
true.
know,
It's very true.
yeah, you're changing like your intention and your motives and your vibe and what kind of things you're interested in from day to day, really. So kind of yeah, it's kind of hard, I think, to be super intentional when you write that way as well. I listened to a podcast that was about like Saison versus some other artist who did stuff really fast. Van Gogh, maybe, I don't know. It was interesting anyway.
You're talking about like visual art?
Yeah, but the podcast was sort of like comparing the difference between 2 artists, one which spent months and months and months and like iterated over his stuff a lot, and the other one which did stuff super fast, but both were super cool artists and super revolutionary and really, I can't remember. One was Saison and I can't remember who the other one was. And then oh, who was it? Yeah, I don't know. But they were making comparisons to like Leonard Cohen being like Saison because he spent so long on his poems, and then Bob
Right.
Dylan being like this other guy because he would only spend 10 minutes doing stuff or
Oh
whatever.
yeah.
But no, I think it's important to try both. Honestly, I've spent weeks and months on tracks before, and it's super hard to like get anything done after that period of time because you're in like I listened to a track say that I wrote last year, and I'm just so far beyond any idea in that track that I'm excited about anymore. I've just heard those ideas too much and they're just old and annoying to me now, so it's super hard to try and carry on with that sort of stuff. But yeah, no, again, a balance is good. I think you should try both.
I've had luck recently actually rehabbing some old products. Like I've gone into a couple of old tunes, like I'm talking like maybe 2 years old, just for funsies. I opened it up and I was actually pretty successful rehabbing it,
Do
getting it back to presentable.
Yeah, do you find when you are in that process of like getting it back to presentable that you're like extremely destructive though?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like I tore out maybe, I mean, there were 30 tracks in it. I took maybe 15 of them out. Like I basically stripped it down to drums and bass lines. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
mostly because I didn't like the synthesizer choice that I had in there, and also out of necessity because that project file had silence, which I don't have the license for anymore.
Mm.
So I didn't have that instrument, so I had to put a new instrument in that place.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I find when I open up old projects like that, I'm almost like just completely destructive because I'll kind of like find that I don't really like any of the sounds anymore and that I don't really like any of the ideas anymore. And usually like maybe there'll be a melody or a motif or something that I like, but because of my general way of writing, I'm quite destructive anyway. Like if I have like a melody that's in a synth, I'll just render that straight to an audio track anyway and sort of just carry on with working. So usually if that's the case, then I'll just have to remake the melody, and then remaking that with a new sound that sounds more modern. Then, again, it becomes that input output system of like, well, shit, now that destroys the bass. So now I have to remake the bass too. And then now that I've done that, it destroys all the sound of the drums sound too weak compared to these two sounds now. So
Oh yeah, I mean, in a way, it's not exactly, or actually, it's probably not even close to the track that I thought it was going to be when I started writing it, and then of course, quit writing it. Right, I didn't finish it, but it's still finished. Like
yeah, I mean, at that point, is it even really the same track anymore? Like at that point, you might as well have just even written an original track almost.
yeah, seriously,
But it's almost like you're being a reactive artist to yourself,
right, yeah.
which is also kind of an interesting take on the creation process, I guess.
I think that's what I was trying to get at. I wanted to say that, it's fine to open up an old project file and mess around with it, even if it doesn't turn out to be what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Definitely. No, I like talking about these ideas because it's kind of interesting to think about like the slight differences in every like creative process that you have. And I think probably doing that 365 project would be really good for that, because on a day-to-day basis you get to see that on a very like a very fast level.
Yeah. And I don't even, yeah, and on that note, I don't even write the same way I did right before I started this project, like 220 days ago. I didn't write the same way I
Right.
do now. Like it's because it's facilitated this speed that I didn't have. I was pretty quick. Like I was quick enough to take on the challenge. I was quick enough to be like, yeah, I could do that. But you know what I'm saying? Like I was confident in my ability to write quickly, but I'm so much quicker now. Like Caroline will sit down here and she's like, this is scary. And but the what I wanted to say was we're talking about cohesion, writing tracks really quickly. If you're writing an album, that intention. I wanted to say that I recently finished an album, and people have told me, not that I'm not trying to plug it, I'm just saying that people have told me this is the most cohesive sounding album, and I think it's due to the fact that I was able to quickly put out the majority of it over the course of like 3 or 4 days. Like I went into the studio on a Thursday, and by Sunday it was done, except for all the mastering and stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like all the tracks had been written and finished. And so it was like that was all cohesive. It feels like one idea when you listen to it.
Right, but do you think sometimes when you like write an album that fast that you get that like doubt in your mind that you didn't put enough detail in it, maybe?
Some
Or
people,
that there's or that there wasn't enough like ideas or something in there because you didn't like, have enough experiences throughout your life that you're inputting into it, sort of thing, maybe? I don't know. I sometimes feel like paranoid when I finish stuff too fast.
really?
Yeah, like if I finish, well, it's funny though because like I'll finish it fast, I'll feel super paranoid and I'll be like, "Oh, I don't know if that feels right. Like I just wrote it in 7 hours or something," but then I'll sit on it for like months, and then I'll just keep coming back to it and just being like, "Yeah, I can't think of anything that I want to add to it, and I can't really think of many mix changes that I want to make." And maybe over like the period of 3 months, I might change the snare volume like 2 dB or something, and then after that, I'll just like master it and put it out.
I don't know. I know some other people who do similar things to that. I don't know. I don't want to call you out and say that maybe that's just some fear, like of rejection with the piece. But I mean, the thing is, if that's all you're doing is just tweaking 1 or 2 dB on a snare over the course of several months, you could have already just put it out and like moved on to something else.
Yeah, totally. Like there's this track called Metrosexual on my last EP, CSS 24 to 27. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, and I wrote that track in 7 hours, like on a Twitch stream, and the Twitch bot is like floating around on my website, MrBillsTunes.com, in the streams section, if you're like a member or whatever, if you want to watch it. But like, yeah, I wrote it in like 7 hours, and you can listen to that stream. At the end of it, it just basically sounds identical to the tune that's on the EP. And I sat on it for months, man, like 6 months. And it's not because of like a fear of rejection from like people. It's because I don't like I've felt something before where I've released a track and then came back to it like, a few months later and listened to it and just been like, man, like I could have fleshed that idea out so much more, or like I could have made those sounds like just so like a little bit better, or I could have just made all these things a little bit better that would have made the whole thing way more enjoyable for me to listen to. Like as far as anyone else is concerned, that's like whatever. But for me personally, I'm kind of like disappointed in myself for sort of like rushing it a little bit. It's sort of like if I was like baking a cake and I was super hungry, so I pulled it out 10 minutes early, but then it was a little bit soggy in the middle or something.
I know what you mean. I think this goes back to a point that we were talking about earlier that I don't think we finished. Where the argument of do you sit on a track, finish it out a little bit more, or do you do kind of the artists, right, the one who just put out versus the artist who would spend months working on something. Um, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I try to balance it out because I don't want to feel that way again. And I also don't want to not put stuff out because I feel like it kind of blocks me up creatively a little bit.
I think it's unavoidable. I mean, you're not gonna like everything you make. It's impossible.
Right. So in that case, I guess we talked about this last time, curation of your output. How important, if at all, do you think curation of your output is, or do you think it's important to put out everything?
I wouldn't say it's important to put out everything, but anecdotally, I would, reference people like Bach, who, he wrote every day out of necessity. So Bach would write something every day because he was working for churches, and every Sunday he had to have 45 to 50 minutes of music, right? Um, So not all of his pieces are great. And if you listen to like his collected curated works, you can tell there were certain ones where he just beat it the fuck down. It's great. It's like the best of the best of the best. You know, people point to Baroque music and they point to Bach and they say this piece is the best piece ever written in Baroque music.
And he probably did it in like a day.
Exactly. So
So do you think that's more of like a hit rate type thing? Like if I shoot a million times at a target, I'm bound to hit it once, sort of thing.
yeah, it's the hit rate thing. It's the shotgun approach, as my wife calls it. So,
Yeah.
like, you know, with a shotgun, you're shooting a whole bunch of bullets at once, and one of them's going to stick. Now that brings in the whole idea of okay, what sounds good to you versus what audience is like, because Bach might not even have necessarily liked that piece of music that everybody else likes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. But I mean, in the end, it's kind of like who are you writing for then?
I don't know. I'd say I write for both. I write for me, and I also write for people. You know, and it's sometimes I feel like if I hold something back, maybe I'm just doing a disservice to somebody it could be helping. But that's kind of big headed of me to even say that. But you know what I'm saying?
No, I have that same thought too. It's kind of like we talked about this last time. The reason why I curate my stuff in such a way, like I don't take any of my old stuff down because I feel that would be wrong to the fans who enjoy that old stuff.
I'm glad we're talking
And
about this again. I really liked that point you made.
yeah, I think like curation is sort of important, but like once something's up, it's on the internet, there's a record of it, you might as well just leave it up. I feel like a lot of artists try and hide who they were as an artist when they first started. And I think that's kind of in a way wrong as well, because then you're sensationalizing things. And I feel like sensationalism is like super wrong. That goes against everything I think like believe in. Like those artists who are on those pedestals up on those giant stadiums playing to 20,000 people, and all they're doing is like playing cookie cutter shit out of a CDJ, you know, like that's to me super fucking bizarre. I don't think humans were ever meant to do that. I think that's just like such a weird thing that we've just come to through like sensationalism in media. And yeah, I mean, I don't really understand how things got there, but I think like curating your output kind of panders to that sort of idea a little bit.
It really does. And I think that if you look back on music history, which I'm a huge music history nerd, if you look back on music history, there's always been a bit of curation, right? Because the orchestra ultimately controlled what got played and heard, right? So they would, I mean, it's a problem today. Like modern orchestra directors will tell you, it's a problem. They can't plan an orchestral season without putting some Beethoven in there somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's not exactly the same thing, right? It's not playback where you literally are playing back a track that was written by maybe not even that artist, right, in front of 25,000 people. It's not the same thing exactly, but it's
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, but that's almost like a completely different thing again, because then it's sort of like language, which is really just an abstraction in itself, because like so let's say that like language, each word means something slightly different to everyone, and therefore the way you'll explain things will be slightly different, and the way that that's interpreted by the other person will be slightly different, and so on and so forth. So it's like, who knows if we're all sort of understanding it the same way and interpreting it the same way. And I feel like it's the exact same with music. It's like somebody who sees a note learns that that note should be played a certain way, even if two players play it exactly how they've both learned it and they've both learned the exact same way. It's still, because it's a language, it's an abstraction, and therefore when you times that by 60 players and a million fucking notes, then it's just going to end up, you know, every time being so different. Whereas like with a CDJ, pressing play every time is going to basically be the same thing. The interpretation from the people in the audience will maybe be different every time, but there's not as many variables, and therefore I think it makes it way cheaper.
yeah, I'd say yes and no. Yeah, because of course different people are going to play their instrument differently, but then I mean there's so many recordings out there of Beethoven 5 that it's kind of there's an understood way to play it, right? So I mean, I don't know. Unless you
I mean,
have
yeah, sure, but there's also an understood way to explain, I don't know, like calculus or something, but then there's just some people who understand it in such a higher way that they can just do more amazing things with it, you know?
I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, I agree.
It's just like language is like a thing that's globally, like English is globally understood the same way by English speaking people, but then there's just some people who are amazing with it because they obviously see it a different way.
Yeah, and then you've got the whole, you know, accents and dialects thing. Some certain orchestras in Europe will play things differently than an orchestra in, you know,
So
New Delhi would.
right, exactly, and that comes down to like us trying to assimilate to our surroundings like chameleons a little bit. I think it's kind of why I speak like an Australian and you speak like an American, because we grew up around that stuff and we just kind of want to copy our surroundings, or maybe we just don't know any better, so we're just kind of like doing what our surroundings are doing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Which is funny
Yeah.
because although I grew up in the South, I don't necessarily sound like I grew up in the South because my surroundings were my parents, and they're from Ohio, which has no accent.
Right. See, I find that kind of strange because I've met parents who don't even speak a word of English and then seen their kids go to school and learn English who sound like totally American or totally Australian.
That's funny.
More, I don't think I've seen that in Australia, but I've definitely seen it in America.
I believe it. Yeah. There was one thing I wanted to cover. One more thing I wanted to cover, and it was, oh yeah. So we've talked about this a couple of times, and this might be something that you'd classify as a vanilla interview question, but I think it's important to just talk about, given that there are so many choices out there, for VSTs or what synth to call your own. You gave me some very sage advice on choose an obscure synthesizer when you're trying to make your own noise. And I want you to talk a little bit about why you say that. Well, why is that?
Yeah, cool. So I've explained this twice to you now, so hopefully I can explain it more concise this time.
Okay.
So yeah, so what I was saying is that I think you should pick a synth that not so many people are using, so you're kind of forced to learn it in your own way. I guess that would be like the overview statement. And what I mean by that is sort of like if you go to learn Serum, your initial thing is probably going to be asking your peers what they're doing with it and watching videos on YouTube and seeing what those people are doing with it, and then shaping your view of what Serum is and how it works and how it should be used off things that other people have already discovered and done. And then you'll obviously like add in your own tinge to it at some point, but it's not going to be as unique as if you take a plugin like, I don't know, Repro One or some, really underground obscure thing that not a lot of people are using, and just figure out how to use it completely on your own with no use of like tutorials or peer help. And then you're going to totally figure it out on your own. It's going to yield a much more unique like result, So you're not going to just be making all these classic dubstep wubs in Massive and Serum, and instead you're going to be trying to recreate those same type of rhythmic, musical, and tonal ideas in your own way using your own methods. And I think that's super important. And I think a good limitation to force yourself to do that would be to just pick some random synth that looks like it's capable of doing all of these things, like has multiple oscillators, has good routing functions, has nice filters on it, has a nice ADSR function, has some really nice maybe built-in effects like some, or I mean, you don't even need that. You could just use external effects. But just as long as it has like all of the nice characteristics of a good synth, and has the main thing is nice oscillators, wavetable capabilities, all the other type of oscillating capabilities like subtract or other synthesis capabilities like additive, subtractive, granular, if that's a thing. A lot of synths don't do that. FM, wavetable obviously, and all that stuff. As long as it has all of the things, then you're more than capable of making similar sounds to most people, but it's not going to be the same because all the algorithms are different. And unless the programmers are just using shit from GitHub and just like copy and pasting it all into a file and spitting out a synth, which a lot of the good ones are not, then you're going to end up with, just a generally more unique sound than you would, I feel like, if you started with the more generic things. I guess that sums up the point pretty concisely.
No, yeah, it's right on. Just find one that you can make your own, and then make it your own.
Right. At some point, I think that that idea gets a little bit like, at some point that idea would be a little bit more shooting yourself in the foot and detrimental than not. Like for instance, I wouldn't say don't pick Ableton and just pick some really obscure DAW like dub turbo or something and just figure it out and do whatever. Even though that could be interesting too, but I mean I think that like learn how to use your DAW really proficiently and just speed that process up by learning off people, because that's just the main thing at the end of the day is creation, and I mean I guess discovery too is kind of important. So maybe learning your own DAW could be fun, or maybe even building your own DAW from scratch. That could be insane.
Oh, now you're getting into some cool stuff.
Dude.
I'm about that. Well, anyway, I got one more question for you, and then I'll let you go. Okay.
Cool.
Got to do this. Got to do this one more time for me, Bill. Are you a
Alright.
boxers man or a briefs man?
Right. Boxer briefs.
Boxer briefs.
That's the answer. We've been over this so many times now.
Oh my god.
Boxers, I guess, are what the silky ones, and then the briefs are like what I call dick stickers because they stick your dick to your balls.
Well, cool, man. Yeah, thanks for stopping by. And tell your fans I said hey, and I'll tell mine you said hey.
Of course, man.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Not a problem, man. Although our time together was short, it was very informative, and I felt like I learned a lot. And I know the rest of the fans that were there also had fun. I think I speak for everybody when I say that I can't wait for him to come see us in Atlanta again. You can follow Bill on SoundCloud, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm going to leave you with some footage that I took from the concert. Please enjoy the chaotic, yet obsessively perfect sound design of Mr. Bill.